Hello everyone, my name is Yujiro Taniyama, and I'm an outspoken finalist for the U.S. State Department's Democracy Video Challenge. And today, I'd like to challenge a tough, sensitive, and a controversial issue between Japan and South Korea, so-called the comfort woman. I do not wish to glorify or whitewash Japan's militaristic past. I mean, that's just disgusting. All I'm asking for is for you to judge this controversial issue based on the basic and the fundamental truth. And that is why I've come to speak in front of my fellow YouTube citizens around the world just like this, to beg you to at least give me a chance to explain what this fundamental truth is all about. Since I do believe that is a fair and a balanced democratic process. So to begin with, ladies and gentlemen, before you head off to your favorite sushi bar tonight and order some California rolls, please drop by your nearest bookstore and get a book written by a prominent American historian and an author, Mr. Bruce Cummings. In his book, Korea's Place in the Sun, Mr. Cummings mentions that many women will mobilize to serve as prostitutes by Korean men. I repeat, I didn't say this, Mr. Cummings did. Many women will mobilize to serve as prostitutes by Korean men. You must be pretty surprised because I guess this is not what you've learned in the past. Probably you've learned that the Darth Vaders on the dark side of the Japanese were the Japanese soldiers who kidnapped thousands of Luke Skywalkers or Korean women and turned them into sex slaves. But unfortunately, that is not true. Let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. On what basis do we simply decide that these so-called comfort women were former sex slaves who were kidnapped by the Japanese army, especially when a bright man like Mr. Cummings has already mentioned in his book that these so-called comfort women were recruited by Korean men? If you are a South Korean citizen watching this video, I guess it's the first time you've heard of this. Since in South Korea you only have one government designated textbook, which means they only jot down the things that benefits the South Korean government. But since everybody, guys, we live in the YouTube world of democracy and freedom of speech. And that is why, my South Korean friends, I strongly urge you to go to Amazon.com and get this great book written by Mr. Bruce Cummings. One click. And by the way, Mr. Cummings is not pro-Japanese. Rather, he's pro-Korean from my point of view, because if you open the page, the first page, there's a map of Korean Peninsula. And the Sea of Japan is printed as East Sea, the way the Korean people want it to be. But anyways, then let's think for a moment, guys. Why did Mr. Cummings mention what he mentioned in his book? It is because a significant number of Koreans and Korean recruiters actually cooperated with the Japanese recruiters from the private sectors in hiring women for sexual service. And furthermore, when the Allies, when I say Allies, I refer to the Americans, the British, the French, the Australians, and the Dutch. Okay, when the Allies moved in to the Japanese occupied territories at the end of the World War II, or even after World War II, because after Japan surrendered in 1945, the Allies came back to recolonize Asia, remember? The British came back to recolonize Myanmar, Malaysia, Singapore. The French came back to recolonize Vietnam, Cambodia. The Dutch came back to recolonize Indonesia. Well, the Australians, the British, and the Dutch, they all came back to recolonize Asia, fighting next 4 years of bloody war. Then anyways, in this speech, let me focus on the point that when the Allies moved into the Japanese occupied territories at the end of the World War II, they too, ladies and gentlemen, they too were pretty much eager to enlist the comfort woman for further service. And that is why this disgraceful history of comfort woman is not simply about the victims belonging to one nationality and the victimizers to another. There's tons of blames to go around. Plenty of blames to go around. And that is why, guys, Mr. Bruce Cummings mentions in his book that the Japanese government and the South Korean government, both governments, for a long time, preferred to remain silent on this issue. Period. Full stop. Don't take me wrong. I'm not trying to rewrite history. And Japan is not trying to rewrite history here. Because we don't need to. We don't need to rewrite history. But we do need you to know the fundamental truth. Because that is exactly the essential factor in deciding for you to make decisions in the world of democracy we live in. Okay, let me tell you one more thing. In 1965, when Japan and South Korea joined a peace treaty, okay, the South Korean government did not mention a single word about so-called comfort women. Not a single word. Isn't that weird? I think that's pretty awkward. Because if the Japanese army had actually kidnapped 200,000, that's huge, ladies and gentlemen, 200,000 Korean comfort women and turning them into sex slaves, like the South Korean government today is claiming. I mean, why didn't Park Chung-hee, then South Korean president back in 1965, why didn't Park Chung-hee mention a single word about it? It doesn't make sense if you're human 20 years after the war, 1965. It is because Mr. Park Chung-hee, he knew that these comfort women were well-paid sex workers. I mean, can you please think up of any other reason that makes sense? Furthermore, the two countries signed a peace treaty in 1965, and it officially ended the possibility for further claim against Japan. And in return, the South Korean government received direct grant of $300 million US plus $200 million US as a loan, and furthermore, another $300 million US as an investment from a private sector, a private company. I mean, this is 1965 USD, ladies and gentlemen. It was huge amount of money, especially for a poor country like Korea back in the 1960s. They were really poor, you know. Many Koreans, that's why they immigrated to America. And many, Korean Americans are in America today. But anyways, the fact is that the Japan and the South Korean government in 1965 signed a peace treaty. The South Korean side did not mention a word about so-called comfort woman, and this peace agreement officially ended the possibility of any further claim on behalf of the Korean side. Any claim, further claim against Japan, period. Therefore, this recent, these claims by the South Korean government saying, oh, apologize, Japanese government, and pay money, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it is totally a nonsense, a fallacy, and a violation of international agreement, or international law, may I call it. Because it was an official agreement between the two nations back in 1965. สวัสดีครับสบายไหมล่ะครับผมไพโรงเรียนนานาชาติ3 ปีที่สุขุมวิท25นะครับชอบบะหมี่หมูแดงเส้นหมี่ลูกชิ้นสัตว์ So that was Thai. I love Thailand. I went to high school there, and I love the people, and I love the beaches of Thailand, and probably so do you. And one of my favorite beaches in Thailand is the Pattaya Beach. Probably you know about it. Some of you've already been to Pattaya Beach and done some parasailing and things. However, not many people today, I mean almost none, know that Pattaya Beach used to be an R&R paradise, meaning recreation and the relaxation hub for the American soldiers fighting the Vietnam War in the 60s and the 70s, which means that Pattaya Beach became big and famous as it is today, since the women who were in Pattaya Beach then offered sexual service to the American soldiers. War and sex has always been like a hand in glove in the history of mankind, guys. And comfort woman is no exception. No big deal. No big fuss whatsoever in the history of mankind. However, guys, why is it that it is always and only this comfort woman issue that just popped up 50 years after the war? The Japanese military kidnapped thousands of innocent Korean women and turned them into sex slaves? Why is it that it's only the comfort woman that's become such a big issue? Especially when a bright man like Mr. Bruce Cummings, an American historian, has mentioned in his book that many women were mobilized to serve as prostitutes by Korean men. But the world sees it as it was all the blame goes to the Japanese army. Why is it that this comfort woman issue is so big? I mean, it is the only issue regarding war and sex in this 21st century today. I'll tell you why. The answer is simple. It is simply because, ladies and gentlemen, the Japanese government was and is nothing but a total idiot. Full stop. About 20 years ago in 1993, one erratic Japanese politician created a story where there wasn't a story. I repeat, please listen carefully here. Around 20 years ago, one erratic Japanese politician in the Japanese government, he created a story where there wasn't a story. On August 4th, 1993, Kono Yohei, then the chief cabinet secretary of the Japanese government, she somehow, without any concrete proof or evidence whatsoever, he suddenly apologized to the South Korean government and admitting and creating this image as though it was the Japanese troops who conducted all the atrocities, or whatever you call it, the word they call it, relating to the comfort woman during World War II. What? Beg your pardon? Beg your pardon me? As I've told you, a bright man like Mr. Cummings has already mentioned in his book, this is one of the evidences, okay, that many women were forced to mobilized to service prostitutes by Korean men. Not the Japanese military. In spite of that, this ignorant, erratic politician, then the chief cabinet secretary, he just apologized. A shallow-minded man he was, and that apology has given South Korea a big political card. And it's definitely making Japan look like a Darth Vader today. Okay, I love the movie Star Wars. But what I want to tell you guys is that this man, the former chief cabinet secretary who apologized, he was like Mr. Herman Cain, who used to be remember the U.S. presidential candidate from the Republican Party a couple of months ago, and he did not know that China has nuclear missiles. Okay? He might be a great pizza delivery man, but he needs to study a little more. And that goes the same with Kono Yohei. He was like a pocket of ignorance, apologizing and creating this image to the world as though it was totally Japanese, the military's fault, who kidnapped thousands of women and turned them into sex slaves, which is obviously not true, as I have been telling you. Let me show you two newspaper ads related to the comfort woman then, ladies and gentlemen. A newspaper ad that recruited the comfort woman. The first ad was posted on Keijo Nippo newspaper, which was published in Korea back in the before 1945 in Korea. And this ad I'm showing you here was posted on the 26th of July 1944, and it reads, "Comfort woman wanted. 300 yen monthly salary guaranteed." When a normal, average factory worker could only earn around 20 yen a month back then, this 300 yen salary, it meant around 15 times more than an average pay. That was a quick buck, a quick grand, ladies and gentlemen. Let me show you one more newspaper ad, okay? This ad right here is, it was posted on the Mainichi Nippo newspaper, which was also published in Korea before 1945. And this ad, newspaper ad, was posted on the 27th of October, 1944. And it reads, "Comfort woman wanted, ages from 18 to 30. If you're interested, come for a job interview from between the 27th of October and 8th of November, 1944. So guys, as you see, these two ads are no different from any other ads we see today recruiting sex workers. For example, on Craigslist or in any sort of yellow tabloid newspaper in your country today. And that is why Mr. Cummings had mentioned in his book that they were recruited, not kidnapped for God's sake, recruited, and that by Korean men. You know, it is totally ridiculous to blame this whole issue on the Japanese army, when in fact, ladies and gentlemen, let me explain to you in a more simple way. What was Japan doing during the World War II? Or 1944, 45, 43, 42? That's right, they were fighting war against America and Britain. Well, England, they surrendered really fast. But anyways, they were fighting war, Japanese military. They had no time to run a sex parlor. Are you joking? That is why it was a sex business that was ran by the Japanese Yakuza tick recruiters who cooperated with the Korean Yakuza tick recruiters. Okay? The Korean recruiters cooperated with the Japanese in hiring these women, as Mr. Cummings has mentioned in his book, Amazon.com. Okay? And to further give you an evidence, guys, the South Korean government, even today, is searching for the descendants or the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren of those Koreans who cooperated with the Japanese before 1945. And you know what? They suddenly give you a call. And they tell you, excuse me, your grandpa or great-grandpa had cooperated with the Japanese in recruiting comfort women before 1945. Therefore, you are convicted. Your whole bloody family is convicted. And you'll be deprived of your assets, your house, your land, blah, 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 blah. According to the South Korean law. It's a legitimate act in South Korea. South Korea is a scary country, ladies and gentlemen. Those guys who, the descendants of the great-grandchildren of those Koreans, who cooperated with the Japanese, they don't owe any responsibility. So do we, the Japanese today. Today's generation, we love Pokemon. We love Naruto. We love Pocket Monster and everything. The PlayStation Wii, whatever. Why? I don't know why I'm saying this, but the fact is that the Koreans, young Koreans today, are being convicted because their grandpa or great-grandpa had cooperated with the Japanese. And that includes the recruitment of comfort women as well, of course. What was the Japanese army doing? We were fighting war, guys. They didn't have time to run a sex parlor, for God's sake. They were fighting war. Of course, it was the Japanese soldiers who actually had sexual intercourses with these so-called comfort women. But that is no different from the American soldiers who had sexual intercourses with the women in Pattaya Beach, Thailand, back in the 1960s and the 70s, during the Vietnam War. However, as I've been telling you, thanks to this apology, this incomprehensible apology made by the former Chief Cabinet Secretary back in 1993, August 4th, this man did not even study Well, anyways, thanks to that apology he made 20 years ago, it's been what do you say? It was definitely a suicide bomber. We are fighting a losing war here, guys, the Japanese, because of that single apology by the ex-Chief Cabinet Secretary 20 years ago. And he was, as I said, he was Herman Cain of the Japanese government. He was a pocket of ignorance. He should have studied before he had made that statement. But anyways, thanks to his apology, the South Korean government, they've succeeded, guys. Oh yeah, they've succeeded in creating this horrific image that the Japanese army were like Darth Vader's horrific image, that they were like Hitler who sent 6 million Jews to Auschwitz. I am sorry, but these two issues are totally different issue. The Jews sent to the Auschwitz or the Birkenau, they were victims, total victims. But the comfort women, they were paid, ladies and gentlemen. They were paid. However, the South Koreans or the South Korean government is trying to mix it into one. I mean, treat the both issues as though they belong to the same planet. I mean, that is why I feel this issue is very much politically motivated, especially it came out 50 years after the war. It suddenly came out 50 years after the war. And the Herman Cain of Japanese government apologized, blah, 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 blah. It's a losing war here, guys, on behalf of the Japanese side. But you know what? About 5 months ago, in April this year, end of April, I personally visited the Auschwitz, Poland, Birkenau, and to send my humblest and the most sincerest prayers to those 6 million Jews in Birkenau, in Auschwitz. But I'm sorry, but the Comfort Woman, I know that from the human rights point of view, the ethical point of view today, we value human rights very much in this 21st century. I'm totally with you. But, of course, from the human rights point of view, my deepest sympathy goes with those so-called comfort women, Korean comfort women, who came out and disclosed their unfortunate past 50 years after the war. However, guys, it does not change the fundamental, the basic fundamental truth of history, that they were sex workers who received decent amount of money, 300 yen, when an ordinary factory worker received only 20 yen in return for sex service. And you know what? There is this notion, or many people believe that, especially the Western journalists, if you're watching this, or I don't mean to challenge you, but I have a question for you, okay? I did ask you before that, on what basis do we decide that these so-called comfort women were forced sex slaves by the Japanese government, especially when a bright man like Mr. Cummings has already mentioned in his book, they were not. They were recruited, many of them were recruited by Korean men. We are already off the track here, off the fundamental truth, okay? And furthermore, I want to ask you one more thing. If you Google comfort woman today, you see the journalists are jotting down on their blogs or whatever that it was a forced sex slave. This sex slave, the term sex slave it's everywhere on this planet today, unfortunately, from the Japanese side. But on what basis are these Western journalists writing? You know, why are they, on what grounds are they writing that they were forced sex slaves? Probably, no doubt, they're writing it because they blindly trust, blindly accept every single word that has been spoken by the ex-Korean comfort woman. But if you want to look into history in a fair and balanced manner, just like the Fox News, fair and balanced, there has to be an evidence or a proof that backs up these testimonies. Otherwise, you know, humans, I don't want to say this, but you know, anybody who looks innocent sometimes becomes evil. They stab people and murder them to death. You never know. Okay? Of course, from the human rights perspective, my sympathy goes with those ex-comfort women. But I don't want to tell you that isn't it a little, it will lead to some jeopardy to blindly trust these confessions of these women in the late 80s or 90s who came out 50 years after the war. It's like you call an Aflac 50 years after your house was burnt down saying, excuse me, can you compensate me? Okay, of course, it's not the same thing, but I have this image like that. For example, one of the ex-Korean comfort women, Kim Hak-sun, She confessed that she was forced back in 1991. However, ladies and gentlemen, the professor of the Seoul University, Professor Ahn Byung-jik, he has stated already in the past, after that, that many comfort women are testifying that they had been forced. However, neither in Japan nor South Korea, not a single evidence exists to prove it. I didn't say this. The Professor Ahn Byung-jik of Seoul University said it in 2006. He also mentioned, Mr. Ahn, that we ought to know that the falsification has been conducted by, in some means or the other, by these so-called comfort women. And that Mr. Professor Ahn also stated that it is totally unthinkable that these women were forced unconditionally. Period. I mean, why on earth did the Japanese military have to force these women? I mean, they didn't have to, because they were paid, well paid, ladies and gentlemen. You know what? Can I tell you just one more thing? Not many Western journalists, or hardly none, somehow mentions this. But there were actually quite a few, I mean, a lot of Japanese comfort women during World War II. But you know what? Not a single one of them, not a single one of ex-Japanese comfort women has ever demanded an apology or compensation towards the Japanese government. And you know why? Because they knew, and they know, that they were sex workers who earned quick grand in return for sex service. Period. My name's Yujiro Taniyama, and I'm an outspoken finalist for the U.S. State Department's Democracy Veto Challenge, and I am not trying to rewrite history here. Don't take me wrong. I despise narrow-minded tribalism. I grew up in the Western educational system. I went to primary school in South Australia. I went to international school in Bangkok. Okay? So I was educated in a democratic system where you value human rights and human dignity. And that is why I am focusing on history here. I could just not tolerate this propaganda that's going on, this kind of, what do you say, you know, it's backed up by this evil will or something. I don't know, but I just thought I had to come out and talk to my fellow YouTube citizens around the world. I know some of you will want to, you know, assassinate me with polonium in sushi. But please don't. I love sushi, especially tunas. But anyways, let me tell you just one thing before I conclude this speech. On the 15th of June 2012, Chosun Ilbo newspaper. Well, Chosun Ilbo newspaper is like, it's one of the biggest newspapers in Korea. You can check it on chosunonline.com. Okay, anyways, this Korean, South Korean newspaper, they wrote an article, okay, this year, a couple of, 2 or 3 months ago, with the title, Shameful Reality. South Korea, world's one of the biggest exporters of prostitutes. Okay. Of course, it's nothing got to do with the comfort woman issue, but let me just at least explain the background of this issue, okay? The Koreans have had a long history of red light district system or sex parlor system called Kisen since the days of the Koryo dynasty, which was founded in 918 AD. We weren't born then, ladies and gentlemen. And the girls in very early teens became from the poor family in Korea. They were sold to these parlors. And this Kisen system had lasted until just 8 years ago, 2004. Until then, sex workers, prostitutes, it was totally legal in Korea. So, I'm not justifying myself, okay? I'm just explaining the history of red light district system in Korea. So, over 1,100 years, this, I don't want to call it cultural tradition, but in a way it was a custom. The Koreans were accustomed to this custom of called the Kisen system, in which sex labor was nothing to be ashamed of. And that is why, on the 15th of June 2015, Chosun Ilbo, one of the biggest newspapers in Korea, they wrote an article saying that, condemning the Korean themselves of going outside of Korea as prostitutes, and that is, many Korean women are doing that, and that is causing bad reputation for the country. And in that article, there was a graph that was made by the U.S. State Department in 2006 saying that 23.5% of all the prostitutes or sex workers in America are Korean. That means 1/4 of the prostitutes in America, they are Korean. Second was Thai, 11.7%. Third was Puerto Rican, 10%, which means the Korean women are by far ahead in America and also in Canada and Australia. Sex workers, Korean sex workers, it's becoming a big issue. On the 13th of June 2012, in Houston, Texas, this massage parlor run by the South Korean women, the massage girls were arrested because they were offering sex service in Houston, Texas, this county called the Harris County or something. If you Google it, you'll find it. But I am just telling you that in 2004, this Kisen system, the sex labor became illegal in Korea, finally and for all. Now they're going out of Korea to earn some quick buck outside of Korea. For example, America. 1/4 of the prostitutes in America today are Koreans. And in this article, it said, in Korea today, although it's illegal, still there are 1,890,000 sex workers or prostitutes in Korea today. And it was, this is a data from one of the ministries in Korea, the Women's Family Ministry or something like that. Please just check for yourselves. I am telling you this. Okay, I'm not trying to rewrite history about comfort women here. I'm just, I'm just telling you the fundamental truth of this history of red light district system in Korea. Well, I'm sweating a little, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you for watching this video. But before I finish my speech, let me just please say one more thing. Why is it that the people in the West somehow believe that the geishas are prostitutes? Many Westerners do, I know, by experience. But actually, they are not. Geishas are artists. Artists who's mastered art of entertainment, such as singing, dancing, playing koto shamisen, these traditional Japanese instruments, as well as performing tea ceremonies. Therefore, it's nothing but a common widespread myth, guys, that geishas are prostitutes. Go ask Ken Watanabe or somebody. He'll answer the same thing. And that myth, this blindly believing this myth, goes the same with the comfort woman. You go to New York, you go to Australia, you go to Prague or wherever. You ask them about comfort women. They will answer, oh, forced sex slaves by the Japanese army? But unfortunately, guys, that is wrong. I think I've mentioned my part in this video. Myth is nothing but a myth. Geisha and comfort women. The Western world both believe the myth is nothing but a myth. All I'm asking for is for you to judge this issue based on an actual fundamental truth. Otherwise, what? Are the Japanese, new generation Japanese today like myself, are we gonna have to keep on apologizing for thousands of years? Well, I don't mind. I like apologizing. But it has to be fair and balanced, just like the Fox News. If I'm supposed to apologize, I will apologize. But I do want you to know, ladies and gentlemen, that this recent claim that 200,000 Korean women were abducted by the Japanese army and turned into sex slaves, you know, it's been claimed by the South Korean government, the Korean Americans in America, as well as Mike Honda, the congressman in the U.S. Well, somehow I think he's originally, his grandpa was Japanese. I mean, I don't know, but the fact is, my personal view that Mr. Honda is also same as Mr. Herman Cain. Pretty ignorant, I believe. I must say, those claims by the South Korean government is nothing but an attempt to challenge or set a world record for blatant lies. We have to focus on the truth. Otherwise, we will be misled to a wrong planet. I do not deny this issue of comfort women, but I do deny that they were forced sex slaves by the Japanese government. If you don't believe me, just please go and get the book written by an American author, Mr. Bruce Cummings. Of course, he is not pro-Japanese. Rather, I've told you that he's pro-Korean. But in spite of that, even Mr. Cummings mentions that many women were recruited by Korean men. That is a fundamental fact, truth. You got to know that if you don't want to become Mr. Herman Cain in the future. I mean, of course, he's a great pizza man, a businessman. However, there is just one exception. And that is the case with Mrs. Jan-Rulf O'Herne, who was a Dutch woman in her late teens when Japan took over Indonesia, kicked out the Dutch after 350 years of colonial rule. Then some arrogant Japanese military officers set up a brothel in Indonesia, sex parlor, and forced Mrs. Jan-Rulf O'Herne and her Dutch peers to work as sex slaves. This was totally conducted by the Japanese military. It was a total violation of human rights, human dignity, and no words are simply sad enough to express the agony and the emotions they had gone through. However, that's not the end of the story. When the high-ranked Japanese military officer, Lieutenant Colonel Odajima Kaoru, he flew from Tokyo and found out about this brothel, okay, which started in February 1944, okay. When the lieutenant colonel found out about this brothel, he immediately ordered the shutdown of the brothel, and those in charge were later punished under the international law and were convicted. Therefore, Mrs. Yanraf Oferne and her peers were forced to work as sex slaves by the Japanese military in Indonesia for 2 whole months. It must have been tough. It was a total violation of human rights. They were the victims. And this Mrs. Yanraf Oferne issue is significant since it demonstrates that the Japanese army did not accept any sort of forced sex labor during World War II. And that is why they shut it down the moment they found it out. Lieutenant Colonel Odajima Kaoru, he ordered the immediate shutdown. And those in charge were later punished under the international law. Some say they were hanged. Please check the rest of the history for yourselves. But I do want to say that this Mrs. Yanraf Oferne issue, case, it is decisively important since in interpreting what happens when the military finds out when a woman had been forced. I am a proud and dignified Japanese citizen. And I am not here. I have not come out here on YouTube to whitewash or glorify Japanese militaristic past. That's disgusting. I told you. I'm not trying to rewrite history here. Japan does not need, we don't need to rewrite history. But we do need you to know the actual truth. And the truth is that regarding the comfort woman, this Mrs. Yanraf Oferne case and the comfort woman is totally a different issue. However, the Western PR media tries to put it into one fruit jar and mix it up and turn it into a fruit juice. But I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Yanraf Oferne and her Dutch peers, they were the victims, and those in charge were later punished by under the international law. Some were hanged, some people say. However, comfort women, they were paid prostitutes, and they were not the victims of sex slavery. That is the stance of the majority of Japanese today. That's what I believe. At least. Because as I told you, there were tons of Japanese comfort women back then. They received decent amount of money, but they haven't demanded an apology or compensation. Some historians say that the majority of the comfort women were even Japanese. So, all I'm asking for, is to divide these issues. Don't mix it up. Because that is what's making this comfort woman so confusing and complicating. Period. I know that Japan's fighting a losing war here, guys. We're in a tight position here. Because thanks to, that apology by, which was not based on truth, by this erratic Japanese politician, as well as the propaganda by the Western PR media. But lastly, I do hope that this little speech of mine I'm making right here in front of you will reach the conscience of some of you before the whole world is brainwashed by the Western PR and media, like it happened 10 years ago, around 10 years ago in 2003, Iraq War, WMD, weapons of mass destruction. When Saddam Hussein was found in this rabbit hole in Tikrit, Iraq, in 2003, I think it was December, looking like Colonel Sanders of Kentucky Fried Chicken, did he possess weapons of mass destruction Ladies and gentlemen, did he? As the Western PR media had said. And that is why the Nobel Prize winner for anti-apartheid, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he recently stated and criticized the Western power politics as double standard, saying, why doesn't Mr. Tony Blair and Mr. George W. Bush, why aren't they sent to Hague, the International Court of Justice, and tried for the blatant lies they made during the Iraq War, WMD? Mr. Desmond Tutu, Archbishop, he's saying that it's always been the African peers and the Asian peers who are always sent to this International Court of Justice. And they're tried, and many of them convicted. But concerning the Western leaders, it seems there's a different standard, a double standard. They are never taken. The winners of World War II, I guess, they're never taken to the place of justice. And when I read that article of those statements by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, I strongly felt an urgent need to come out in the public to let you know the fundamental truth of history before the whole world is totally brainwashed by something that is not true. My deepest sympathy, I repeat, my deepest sympathy goes with those ex-comfort women who came out disclosing their unfortunate past. But that is a different issue. I'm asking for truth here. And the final decision is up to you, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you probably you want to put polonium into my sushi. But we live in a democratic world, ladies and gentlemen. We have to solve this issue in a fair and balanced manner. And I do hope, lastly, that some of you will read the fundamental truth from my very lips. Thank you very much.